Well, howdy all, grab yourself a beer, it's time for some Path of Exile discussion. So I wanted to run an experiment this weekend, and to try to find out just how much loot the monsters in the Scourge dimension drop in any given map. So, what I did was I picked a very common divination card. The divination card I chose was the divination card Loyalty, which drops in the Grotto map. It's a pretty common drop, in fact it's a very common drop, and it's a set of 5 of this card, gives you 3 Orbs of Fusing. The reason I picked this card is that I knew it was extremely common, and as a result, I knew I could test whether the drops that I was getting of this divination card were coming from Scourge monsters or from the regular monsters in the map generally. So, I ran a couple of dozen copies of Grotto maps. Most of them were chisel elked, some were just directly elked, and I paid attention to every drop that I got of a Loyalty divination card. I got 204 drops. As I said, this card is common. Of those cards, 3 of them I couldn't tell where it came from, so I didn't count those ones. Of the 201 copies of the card that I was able to track, I've been expecting to have perhaps 80 of them be from the regular monsters and 120 be for Krangleverse monsters. Now, if that was the case, doing all of the Scourge content in the map would roughly double and a half the amount of loot you get. Well, I was wrong. It turned out that the amount of monsters the amount of drops from the Krangleverse was much higher, much higher. And it turned out that there were that it was a 330% more multiplier, approximately, on the amount of divination cards that you were getting. So, I got 47 divination cards from the regular maps, like the regular map monsters, the general inhabitants of the map, and then I got a further 154 from the Scourge dimension monsters. So, that's the first thing to note. Most of your loot in maps that you're running where you've got Scourge monsters present is actually coming from the Scourge monsters, not from the base monsters in the map. The second thing to say here, though, is that random luck can feel like it can play a big role in how much you get. And this is why I picked something so common as the Loyalty divination card. There are a number of statistical techniques that are used to smooth out some of this variance, and I have used a Wilson confidence interval in order to get a best and worst realistic case scenario of what the drop rates actually are. So the most extreme outlier cases that seem reasonable are given by a 95% Wilson confidence interval. And at the lower end, now by lower end I mean that the base map monsters provide the lowest proportion of the loot. That would have you getting 18% of the loot from the base monsters and 82% from the Krangleverse monsters. At the higher end, it's 30% and 70%. So even at that highest end, even at the highest end where you're saying that I got extremely unlucky on the amount of loot that I got from the regular monsters, even in that case, the monsters in the Krangleverse triple and a third your loot and more. So basically, you should see doing the Scourge dimension as basically being like having a winged divination scarab on every map you run. But not just a winged divination scarab, it's also a winged reliquary scarab, and probably better than that because there's a number of bonuses to item rarity that are contained in the Scourge dimension as well. So yeah, the too long didn't watch version of this video is make sure you are doing the Scourge dimension. If you're not able to handle the Scourge dimension, because it drops so much loot, it's just objectively correct to drop tiers until you can do the Scourge dimension and do it smoothly. This is something I don't like about Scourge. I think it's dropping too much loot that you can't ignore it, and that means that you have to drop tiers. If you're someone that can do tier 16 maps but can't do the Scourge dimension there, but you can do the Scourge dimension in, say, tier 8 maps, then you will get much more rewards by dropping to tier 8 maps and doing the Scourge dimension there. Lastly, there's a number of divination cards that are absolutely crazy when you can scale their drop rates a lot. Some of the examples you might want to consider scaling the drop rates on are the divination cards, the Nurse from Tower, the Patient from the Armory map, although Armory is only available as a red map this league, the Scout from Tropical Island, and the Saint's Treasure, which drops from Alleyways, amongst other maps. Those are some of the maps you really want to consider running in this league, especially if you can find a setup that is able to full clear all the monsters in the Krangleverse in there. That's all I got on this one. May your Valobs have interesting results, and I will see you around.